what you should see is a little red thing that says we're live up at the top of the screen.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not red, it's not red, but I see it.
Yeah, it should say live on Facebook up there. All right. So welcome to another installment of Live at 5. We're going to give everyone a minute or two to join us this afternoon. We've got a fantastic program, which I'll tell you all about in just a moment. So give everyone a chance to sit back, relax, grab a drink, and get ready for a great history program. I'm going to make sure I have my Facebook set up here so that I can see your comments, your questions as we go along. If you have questions about the research that we're going to talk about or any of the questions for the speakers, please let me know in the comments, and we'll go ahead and let's see, one more thing to do here, and I should be ready to go. And something went wrong. We're having trouble with this video. That's never a good sign. Let's see here. I will note that we are having some thunderstorms in our area right now, and that seems to be messing with our internet connection, so please bear with us. Anyone out there? If you can see our program right now, let me know in the comments, please. Because I don't see. Yeah, this is. I'm going to blame it on the weather because that seems to have been the problem earlier. I'm gonna check on my phone just to make sure. Yes, he's seeing here just fine. Great, awesome, thank you. All right, wonderful. Well, with that out of the way, thank you guys so much for bearing with us. It's my pleasure this afternoon to have two fantastic guests with us for our Live at 5 program. I'd like to welcome Dr. George Oberle, who is a history librarian at the George Mason University, also part of the history faculty there, and Dr. Cythia Kierner, who is a professor of history at George Mason University. Cythia, I also have to let you know, our MHA president, Jennifer Moore, her favorite book ever is Scandal at Bazaar, so she's going to probably be at home like fangirling about you right now.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. That's my favorite thing that I've ever written. You got to love a book that they put blood on the cover.
Right. Now, today we're not going to talk about Scandal at Bazaar, unfortunately. We are going to be talking about the latest project that you two are involved with, and that involves the Mason family manuscripts that are there at the Fenwick Library at George Mason. These manuscripts include an account book relating to the Mason family who lived at Raspberry Plain in Loudoun County, just north of Leesburg. Also associated with Selma, big property there, just outside of Leesburg. So let's begin with that. George, I know you know quite a bit about the Masons, so give us an introduction to the individuals that we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So the Mason family account book is the actual account book of Stevens Thomson Mason, who was the nephew of George Mason IV, our namesake at George Mason University. He was the son of Thomson Mason, George Mason's younger brother, who, you know, was a patriot in his own right and had significant properties in Loudoun County as well as elsewhere. But those properties were mostly secured for him by his mother, actually, who has a fascinating story that I'm working on as part of an article also. After he died, which he died fairly young, I don't remember his age, and don't make me do math, but he died in 1803. His son, Armistead Thomson Mason, also used this same account book, and Armistead Thomson Mason is very famous, I know, in Loudoun County. because everybody knows about the duel, right, between him and John McCarty, his cousin, right? So, which is also fascinating and very interesting. But of course, Armistead Thomson Mason was a sitting senator and a very young sitting senator when that duel happened. And so we had this account book, and the account book, it's their account book, but also other members of the family are in it, such as Mary Mason, who was the wife of Stevens Thomson Mason. I'm sure. You know, one of the things that Cindy and I also talk a lot about is how everybody seems to name their daughters and their children and sons all the same names. So there's actually a lot of Marys in the Mason family, and there's lots of Georges, obviously, lots of Thompsons. So anyway, yeah. So that's whose account book it is. Yeah.
And like roughly what dates are we talking about with these account books, just for a little context here?
Yeah, sure. So let me make sure I get it totally right. Essentially, the accounts are from 1792 up through Armistead's death in 1819, roughly. So 1792, it's Stevens Thomson Mason's book, and then he used it until he died in 1803, and then his son took over and used it until he died in 1819.
Okay. Now, when we talk about account books here, and maybe Cythia wants to chime in on this, what type of information is contained inside these account books? You know, what kind of data are we talking about?
Well, even if you were just a kind of normal person and you didn't have like a store or something like that, you would have had an account book to keep straight your dealings with other people, whether that meant selling crops or whether it meant, you know, buying eggs or textiles or something like that. The Masons, like most planter families, also had a kind of storehouse. And in that storehouse, they would, you know, they would buy crops from local farmers or trade crops with local farmers. But they would also supply things like, you know, textiles being, I guess, the most important thing, that they would either bring in from, you know, large American places or more likely import from overseas. And so if you look at this account book, when you think about, you know, the Masons, they're planters, they're also lawyers. But what you find in there really is a kind of snapshot of not just their economic activities as planters and lawyers and shopkeepers, but really a snapshot of the economic activity of Loudoun County generally. So you might have a guy listed in the account book, you know, with a kind of really sort of generic sounding name. And you might find that, you know, the Masons owed him a little bit of money for work he did, but then maybe they owed them, the guy owed the Masons a little bit of money for materials that he got from their storehouse. And if you dig enough deeply into the records, you might find out that the one case that I'm thinking of is that this person is a free African-American man in Loudoun County who used to be a slave, but now he kind of works as a laborer. And part of working as a laborer is being hired by, you know, wealthy people like the Masons who might be a little short-handed, but then rather than getting actually cash in the form of wages, he would get stuff from their storehouse instead. I mean, so like most people know that colonial Virginia is a cash poor economy. I mean, there are rich people, but they are rich in land, they are rich in slaves, they are rich in crops and stuff. They're not rich in cash. And to a certain extent, that carries over into the post-revolutionary period, you know, hence the need for account books, because you're not just giving people money, you're in fact trading things that are worth money, including labor.
Okay. Well, now that we've kind of explored that, both of you, I'd love to hear about this project. You know, how did you get started on this research project, and what are you guys working on now?
Yeah,
George,
sure.
you start because it's kind of your idea.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Travis, this is a good time to show the financial papers of George Washington's site. And so what happened is I was at a digital symposium, actually with you, Cindy, and this person named Erica Kavanaugh, who works for the Center for Digital Editing, was showing off this tool that they developed for how to kind of engage with the financial papers of George Washington. And if you've ever like actually used an account book, actually, would you mind clicking on the image part?
Sure.
If you've ever actually used an account book, you'll be really familiar with it. I mean, it's incredibly daunting to be able to actually engage with, and it's it's lines, and typically there's a line there's 2 pages that are back to back, and there are credit and debit pages. And ultimately, the thing that Erica came up with was a fantastic way using a tool called Drupal to be able to transcribe this content and make it searchable and usable from a data perspective. So that's where I started to get an idea. And I thought about, if you don't mind going to our Mason family manuscript up there, I thought about our own book that was long scanned. We bought this Mason family account book in 2012, and it had been scanned right away, but I thought about how it was underutilized. And so I wondered if there was a way that we could apply the stuff that Erica and her colleagues at Center for Digital Editing came up with this tool. And so I pitched it to Cindy and said, I wonder if we could do this by using, cheap labor, meaning students. Yeah. And to help us, because we have no money, right? So, but they would get a skill out of this. And we have a really good public history program. And we wanted to, which I'm sure you all know of, the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. So, I mean, we're kind of, people come to our institution with this idea of learning some public history skills. And since Cindy had actually already done some actual traditional editing, which I knew nothing about, I said, I wonder, but I understand the technology-ish. I said, I wonder if we could apply this. And so what we did is we went to one of our programmers in the library, and can you go to the all account book folio there? And we kind of took what they had, and if you can go to page 11, book folio 11, and we applied it in our context, and we made some modifications. And so this is what we came up with. So this is an example where we have both the debit and the credit pages viewable to the user, which we think is an enhancement of the original idea, because that's the way you use these things, right? You always kind of have to look, well, what are they exchanging for X labor or, Y good? And so, and if you scroll down, you'll see our transcriptions are down there. And then Cindy
and students did these transcriptions. Absolutely. That you're seeing.
Yeah, this was all part of our class.
This was part of our class this semester. And I mean, I would say that one of the reasons why, like we have the credits and the debits side by side, whereas in the Washington financial papers, which was the first example you saw, they had taken them apart. And I think not only is it easier to look at them side by side, but the Washington project is an enormous project. And so that the people using that are not necessarily going to be interested in the specific people and the specific account that they might have with George Washington. Our project is much smaller. I mean, this account book is a few hundred pages long. And so, I mean, we are really thinking of this, at least partly, as a window onto the economy and the inhabitants of Loudoun County during this period. So on the page that's being shown on the screen now, Debtor, that means debtor, not doctor, Christian Seeger. I mean, we're going to have a biographical entry about Christian Seeger, and we're thinking that in a lot of ways, this project is ultimately going to be useful, not just to people who are interested in the Mason family, because as George said, that's not really our main interest, particularly because this little account book is just a tiny slice of the Mason family story, and on its own, you know, there's not really a whole lot there, but people might be interested in Christian Seeger. They might be interested, if you look down on the page, Cash for Langley's Order. Who is Langley and who is Dr. William Moxley, and how are these people all connected with each other? So that's another advantage of having the pages side by side, is you can see these networks and these connections, and people who do digital work, and George is one of these people, have this great software that they can sort of make visualizations of these connections or these networks between people. And at some point we envision doing that as well.
Wow, that sounds like a tremendous amount of work to do. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about, you're talking about making kind of biographies of these folks. You know, have you started work on that in terms of gathering biographical information, in terms of trying to figure out who these people are?
The main work, I mean, you saw the transcription that our students did. The main work that they did this past semester was actually researching and writing biographical entries. So we had 7 students, each of them produced 6 entries over the course of the semester, which obviously was a lot easier before the libraries closed, but they did a great job, you know, considering. And those 42 are in the process of being edited by George and me, and we have a graduate student who is on the project as well, whose name is Ann Daubertine. And so we should have 42 of them ready to go. We obviously have a lot more to do. But you know, that's a significant chunk of work that was done this past semester.
And let me just add, and some of them are incredible. And so, and we kind of got started, we knew we wanted the biographies right away. And we got started by going to places like the Bulge, and we, and other kinds of archival repositories, who were incredibly helpful, both before the pandemic, but even after. And even the Loudoun County Courthouse folks were incredibly helpful in allowing us to like purchase some access to the records there, which is how they built this. I mean, this is an old-fashioned social history, genealogy kind of work. And some people's names are, so who was one of the jackpots? The Pottses, right? And apparently the Potts, we don't know much about the Pottses, Cindy and I, but we learned about that they are a notorious family in Loudoun County.
And there are lots of them.
There are a lot of Pottses.
Right. And so somebody got one of those jackpot ones, you know, like a Jonas Potts.
Jackpot,
yeah, right. And you know, they did a great job. They did the best they could with sometimes incomplete information, but some were gold. I mean, the person I know you were talking about, Cindy, Richard Williams, for example. So Richard Williams was an enslaved man who became somehow connected with Stevens Thomson Mason as like maybe a personal servant. He was eventually freed, or emancipated, I should say, and this student found this, for, quote, faithful services and a strong attachment to Mason's personal interest, unquote. And then he continues to like work for them. And I mean, it's an incredible story that one of our students, David Armstrong, kind of unearthed. But to be honest, each one of our students unearthed at least one incredible student, wouldn't you say, Cindy?
Well, yeah, and what's really remarkable, I mean, to go back to the example of Richard Williams, I mean, you know, when we first gave this person to David to work on, we're kind of like, yeah, Richard Williams, not a really helpful name, not very distinctive,
right.
And a lot of these people have, either names like Potts, where there's like, oh my God, there are hundreds of these people, what do we do? Or really kind of generic names like Richard Williams. And, one of the things that we told the students, but I think we were kind of crossing our fingers when we were, that, oh yeah, you'll find stuff, you'll figure this out, sure, go for it. And they did find stuff. And, which, on the one hand, it gives you sort of new respect for the kind of work that good genealogists do, and to do social history the way we're doing it. Those skills are really valuable. On the other hand, because these are graduate students in history, we are pushing them to not only discover these stories, but to sort of make a case for their significance. Like, okay, so what? We have this guy in an account book who was a weaver and who was like bringing cloth to the Masons, store and getting credit for it. And okay, so what? So what? Why should anybody care about this? And so, I think that's the part where sort of history meets genealogy, that okay, let's say for the sake of argument, you don't care about the Masons, you don't care about Loudoun County. Sorry, I don't want to scandalize anyone out there, but let's just pretend, how are these stories going to be useful and going to be valuable to other people who just maybe want to understand the way society at the turn of the 19th century worked, and how these sort of not just social relationships, but economic relationships would have worked. Because I think, a lot of people just kind of maybe think they kind of understand that stuff, but I don't think you do really understand it until you see it in action. And that goes for historians as well.
Right.
So you've mentioned a few kind of standout individuals so far. Is there any one person or one story, one transaction that really speaks a lot to this, or really stood out as unusual or fascinating to you guys?
I'm still kind of fascinated by the whole crying sale, Cindy.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember exactly. I guess it was Mary Mason, right? And there was some kind of crying sale that was associated with, I guess they were broke and they were selling parts of their property, right? And so students are looking in the account book and they come across this word, or this phrase, I should say, crying sale, and they're like, "What is this?" And I'll be honest, I didn't know. So they looked into this whole idea of what a crying sale was, and in the context of this family, they found some examples, I think, in the Loudoun newspaper. Forgive me, I forget the name of it, but
the Genius of Liberty around that.
Yeah, how can I forget? And so that's another aspect of the book or the work, is we had them create these annotations slash what else did we call them? Glossary.
So yeah. So tell them you the punchline. I just automatically thought that a crying sale was maybe a sale that you had when someone died because you were kind of mourning and crying, which I think makes sense. But it turns out that a crying sale, it's an auction, and it's because the auctioneer is out there crying out, the bids and this is a fabulous piece of furniture. You really got to buy it. And so, I think, one of the important takeaways from this, both for our students and for, potential users who might not really think about this sort of thing a lot, is how, language sort of changes over time, and how, I think that, my provisional definition of a crying sale made perfect sense, but that's because I never really thought about, auctioneers and what they would have done for a living, especially before auctions went online and stuff, yeah.
Well, and then we got stumped on a couple of things like Napkins, and then we really tried in the book. It clearly says Napkins.
Neph.
Yeah, PH.
Quins. So, like, is that a Scrabble word or what?
So, and then we just continue. We still don't totally know, but we think they meant napkins, and a type of napkin.
And it's certainly a kind of textile. I mean, one of the things that the students learned was all the many different kinds of textiles that are now pretty much obsolete, because, you would come across, go back to the weaver guy who comes in and, brings his stuff, and there's a whole list of, and he brought better, and some of them are clearly recognizable as types of textiles. And so you've got this information that he's a weaver. You got this information that he brings in a list of 6 different things and gets credit for them. And 2 of the 6 things, are obviously textiles. And so from there, there are, just kind of every kind of reference book imaginable exists. And so there is a dictionary of obscure textiles. It's not called that, but it could be, and so that's kind of how students found out some of those things. Yeah.
And as a librarian, that was incredibly rewarding to me to kind of encourage the kind of deep use of different sources. I mean, obviously our manuscript source that I felt was underutilized, having that being used, but even talking about how to use the sources and how to engage with the sources, because we spent a significant time early on trying to help the students understand the purpose of an account book, to understand what money looked like, right? And the value of money, and that it's not an easy one-to-one comparison.
And the fact that in our chronological period, money is very much in a state of flux. So they're using dollars and cents, but they're also still using pounds, shillings, and pence. And sometimes they'll use them like kind of in the same account. And that's something that, economic historians have done this sort of painstaking work to kind of figure out what all of this means. And we kind of don't really totally understand it. But even that is sort of, a revelation to students. And, fortunately, we had a good tech person working on the website that he was able to sort of put, I don't know what you would call it, in there that you could use either kind of currency and that it would still make sense to users. But I don't think most people, even most historians, understand how much in a state of flux American currency was for a very long time after independence, and that it's not all of a sudden everything is dollars and cents, and it all kind of makes sense, no pun intended, because it really doesn't.
Yeah, he's still like trying to deal with one of our asks for programming, which is trying to get at half a pence. So there were a few entries that had half a pence. I'm like, seriously? but that's what's in there.
Just round up and give them some more stuff.
Exactly.
This period, at least for me personally, is a fascinating period because of the kind of flux in society, not just in economics, but I think people are still kind of grappling with what it means to create this republic. Does that really play out in these account books? We've talked about some people who've been emancipated, who've attained freedom in this period. Is this a period where we're kind of seeing these Republican virtues of, these, I don't know, kind of middling sort people asserting themselves more economically, politically? Do you see any sense of that?
I think there are hints at it, and maybe Cindy can speak to this a little more, but here are the hints I see. I see former Revolutionary War officers are in these books. I see a community. One of the examples I see Methodist ministers, and there's some examples of the evangelical kinds of ministers there. There's lots of evidence of slavery in this book. Tons. I mean, we only talked about Richard Williams, but there's evidence of people, enslaved people being sold in this book in different places.
I mean, the things that I would add, and like I said, I mean, we've only done 42 of these people, but it's clear that, you know, part of grappling with the post-revolutionary period, it is also westward expansion for white people. And so, like, a substantial number of the people in the book either go to Kentucky, which of course begins as being part of Virginia. Some of them, there's there's a substantial Quaker population in Northern Virginia and in Loudoun County in particular. Some of those people end up going to Ohio, which I'm sure has something to do with wanting to get away with slavery, or at least go to a new place where slavery wouldn't be as much a part of the equation. And so, like, some of the people in the account book are people who themselves have moved to quote unquote frontier places, or have maybe family members who have, and we obviously have to sketch out some of those connections. And in fact, you know, the Masons living in Loudoun County themselves are a kind of, you know, earlier manifestation of that sort of thing, because of course they start out in places like Fairfax and in places like, you know, the eastern part of Virginia, and wealthy families in those areas grab up land in places like Loudoun before white people at least are actually starting to live there, because they're speculators. And they want that land to go to, you know, their younger sons so they can have plantations. So, I mean, you know, our Masons in Loudoun are in some ways the first wave of that. But some of the people that we're seeing in the account book are kind of the next wave. They're going to Kentucky, they're going to Ohio, they're going to other places. Someone went to South Carolina. I don't know why you would choose that, but anyway, and then the other thing that I would say that is kind of you know, indicative of what's going on, you know, in terms of sorting out, you know, what the post-revolutionary period is going to be like is, I mean, we haven't transcribed it yet because it's some of the harder pages in the account book, but pages that are just full of information about the legal business of the Masons. And I'm not a legal historian, nor do I want to be one, but based on what I've read, I mean, you know, Virginians are always litigious people, but they become litigious in a different sort of way after the Revolution. And that's maybe where I think we might see, you know, as you put it, Travis, middling sorts of people becoming more assertive against the quote unquote gentry in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened earlier. I'm not sure, but I would not be surprised if we found that.
Well, we do have quite a few comments going on here. Let me see if I can grab a few questions. We had somewhere up on the list here. I know Allison Herring, who is, her background as a CPA has prepared her for this. She loves account books. She is asking about, you know, how much of this work is available online? Is it just the account book, or are these biographies available?
They will be.
They will be. Yep.
Okay.
George showed you the screen from the library. That's the digitized account book that hasn't been transcribed. That's available now, and anyone can use it. In terms of the transcriptions and the biographical entries, they will be available. We really haven't decided how much of it has to be done before it goes public. I don't think we've actually even talked about that.
I don't think so either. And in fact, technically, we haven't even hidden it. So some of it's kind of available to view. Like Travis, you showed a piece of it out there with the folio pages. That's all available. And so you can look at those folio pages that we've transcribed so far. But we have not put up the biographies yet because Cindy and I and Anne want to edit it to make sure that they're like, they're sharp and ready for consumption, like a broad consumption.
Yeah.
So, but they will be.
Great.
Oh, and the Washington stuff that George showed you.
Yeah,
I mean, if Allison is interested in that, my God, she could play with that for a year.
I mean, it's amazing, and all of that's downloadable. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
We have a few comments from someone that I know is also very familiar with the Mason family papers, and that is Sharon Vertz, who I know has done some tremendous research specifically into the Armistead Mason, mentioning not only that 3 of Stephen Thomson Mason's children moved to Kentucky, part of that movement that you mentioned, but also bringing up an individual named John Tebbs, and specifically the ironing of John Tebbs. I'm not personally familiar with that story. Is that something that you've come across?
The ironing? What is that?
Ironing of John Tebbs and his subsequent sale. So I'm assuming this is a
I didn't see him in the account book. I didn't see an account for him in the account book. So we're really only focused right now on the account book issue. So I'd be curious to learn more about it.
Yeah, and I think we'd like to have Sharon actually on a subsequent program to talk more about her research in the same set of records here. One question I had is, you've talked about student involvement in this, that the students have done the majority of the transcriptions and the research for the biographies. Is this a project that you have any plans to open up kind of to the public? Is this something the public can get involved with, maybe the transcription? Or is this just something you're going to keep there at the university?
We plan on teaching the course until it's done. And I mean, I think the reason for that is, I mean, I know like Library of Virginia does some fabulous crowdsourced transcriptions. And actually Papers of the War Department at George Mason. I mean, if anyone wants to do a closer to home project, they do the same sort of thing. I mean, George and I really conceived this course as a way to teach documentary editing and maybe a little bit of digital history in a really sort of applied and concrete way. And so I think that insofar as our public history program has ever offered documentary editing courses, they have been offered by people who are working on kind of big book projects. And I think it's been a lot less hands-on than what we're doing. And we think that's valuable. I mean, we think that it's a skill that, students can use when they go on the job market. And I think for that reason alone, we really don't anticipate opening it up to the public because we see it as such a useful teaching tool.
But we are hoping that the model will be useful for other institutions who have account books to be able to apply. So if I don't know this, if the Balch or somebody has account books, there's no reason they can't use the same tools that we've done with a small amount of investment in terms of server space and a volunteer programmer type who our programmer is Andrew Stevens, who really made this possible for Cindy and I. But yeah, people we want, and we're going to publish all the ways that we did this, and he's putting the software code out on GitHub so that people can actually use his code. So,
and I think that, and I mean, George understands this a lot better than I do, but the idea is, that I mean, our little account book, I think, is a really nice portrait of, the people of Loudoun County in this particular period, or at least a subset of them and their relationships. But, this particular little account book on its own is not really useful from a big data point of view. But as more and more, universities, libraries, historical societies, people begin to do this sort of work with other account books, then you are going to have the kind of aggregate data that you can say, well, okay, let's look at these 30 account books from Virginia in the post-revolutionary period, and let's see what we can get out of them, and making them, sort of searchable, and having the data that people can get out will make it useful in an entirely different sort of way, right? I mean, so, there are local history people, there are genealogists who are, I hope, going to find what we're doing useful in certain ways. And then there's the digital history people who are maybe going to find it useful in others, or that's the hope.
Great. So just looking, looks like the link to the War Department papers has been posted in the comments here. So if anybody is interested in that, you can follow up there. Let's see, and Sharon clarified who Mr. Tebbs is. He was a runaway slave who is involved and is apparently in this this account book. So.
Oh, good. Well, we haven't gotten there.
Great. Excellent. We know.
I'm sure we'll be horrified, but
yeah, but we'll have at least one more good story. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the most interesting thing is Cindy and I were really just counting based on our intuition that this would work. And it seems to have kind of worked for the first, at least for one semester.
And one of the things we did with our class, the last class meeting, and this was written into the syllabus from the very beginning, is that we were going to have like a post-mortem, that, the last class would be entirely devoted to candid discussion of what the students thought worked well, what they thought it needed changing. Once we moved online, since our class was on Monday nights, I used my authority to change it to a post-mortem / virtual happy hour, so that made it more fun. But I mean, I think all semester long we were kind of teasing the students and saying, you are our guinea pigs / pioneers, and I think at the end of the semester, a lot of the suggestions that they had were very, very helpful, and we took notes, and we're gonna make changes, and that is one real advantage of dealing with a relatively small group of graduate students who get to know each other and get to know us, and we all trust each other, and we told them, we said, look, I mean, this was written in the syllabus from the beginning. You are not going to hurt our feelings if you say that something didn't work, because we truly, want to know that.
So maybe y'all want to take a class. You should come take a class, Travis.
Take a class.
Because you can help us, I'm telling you.
Next spring, be there.
I'll probably just be at the Balch Library when you come back to do research there.
That's fine. You're a big help, I'm telling you.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't think it's a... I was just going to say, I don't think it's a conflict of interest for me to promote them as a fantastic local history resource.
Oh, they're incredible. They're incredible. They were so helpful.
One of the interesting things about this class and about the kind of students we attracted, which there were only 7, but they were mostly people who, were already to some extent involved in public history, either as house interpreters or as librarians or whatever. And that was really good, because I mean, not only did they have skills that were useful, but we kind of felt like we were sort of adding to their skill set and adding, if you have a course on your transcript, it kind of almost proves to prospective employers that you probably know something about the field that you, especially if your instructor gives you an A+, which, like I said, we had a lot of A+.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left. So again, anyone watching, if you have questions, now is your time to ask. We loved answering questions. There was a question a little bit earlier, maybe kind of someone was looking at the phrase of the crying sale. Again, something that I had never seen before. I'm wondering if there was any connection to the Great Slave Auction or the Weeping Time.
That was another hypothesis that George and I had, you know, and again, very often connected with the death of the master and what that meant for enslaved people. It turns out in this instance, that was not what they were talking about. But I mean, again, like a totally logical connection to make, but it at least in this case, it didn't play out.
I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of doing this type of research is just challenging kind of the assumptions I have going into it. You know, you see a phrase and, you know, what is most obvious to us in the 21st century is not at all what it might be obvious to someone in the early 19th century. So any kind of lasting, you know, any lasting takeaways from this project that really stuck out to you before we go? Anything either with the project itself or with the documents, what you've read before we head out here today?
But the one thing I want to add is that it fits within this overarching program that we are developing at George Mason called the Legacies of George Mason. And so it is one of several different initiatives in which we're trying to understand the impact of slavery as well as other issues, but in particular slavery, on our current society and how slavery fits into the story, not just of the Mason family, but also this region. So we are doing lots of local history research. I have students who are doing history on the early history of the George Mason campus, but we're also doing research into early lynching that was going on in Loudoun as well as I think in Fauquier, and there were some other places where different kinds of events that have had a long-lasting impact on our society. And so this is just one example of an early project, and we hope to be doing more.
Yeah. And I mean, George is really spearheading that kind of broader Mason's legacy effort. I mean, what I would say is the program, the course and the project also really builds on, you know, some of the real strengths we have in the Department of History and Art History at Mason, which is early American history. I mean, we are actually one of the best departments in the country for early American history in terms of the number of scholars who work on it and the quality of the work they do, but also in terms of the digital stuff. You know, I mean, George Mason, not me, but George Mason, the university is sort of synonymous with digital history and what they used to call new media. And I think it's really, I mean, I always tell graduate students in particular, when you go to a university, you really should take advantage of the special things about that university. And it seems to me early American history and digital history are two of the really special things about George Mason University. And it's very, very cool to be able to pull those things together into a package that is going to be sort of, you know, academic and intellectually demanding and intellectually stimulating, but at the same time, give our students some real world skills that will hopefully, you know, help them to get jobs that they actually like when they get out in the workforce. That's a really important thing, I think.
I agree.
We like our jobs.
If people out there watching today want to learn more about this project or want to keep up with the progress that you're making, where can they go to do that?
At this point, probably the best thing would be to email me. I'd be happy to, you know, engage in correspondence with anyone. If I need to bring Cindy in, I'll bring her in. But I think that's the best place to go right now. You can actually, like I said, you can kind of see a mock-up of some of the account book now. if you go to masonfamilyaccountbook.org, that library, shoot. What is it? It's on your page.
I think I've got it right here.
Yeah, it's on your page.
All right. masonfamilyaccount.gmu.edu.
There it is. That's right.
There you go.
And
I'll
if you
post
want
that
to,
in the comments.
and if you want to see the real thing, you can come by our special collections once we're open, and you can engage with the real thing. And it's actually an impressive work to kind of deal with, you know, like any old stuff is, but you know, you're welcome to use the digital surrogate or take a look at what we're doing.
Yep.
Great. Oh, somebody just did it for me. Thank you for saving me the trouble, Peter. Great. Well, really excited about this research. Very excited to see what directions it takes you, and really fleshing out this picture of Loudoun County during a fascinating part of you know, its history. You know, as I said, an area of great, an era of great change, an era of great upheaval. And what I particularly love about this is, you know, this account book, even though it comes from the Mason family, this very wealthy, powerful family, the people in it are ordinary, everyday people, and their story is really what draws me into this project. So cannot wait to see how it comes along. I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. Thank everyone out there who's watching at home. If you have any further questions, I guess you can, George, you said you'd be the person to email.
Sure.
So thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for watching. And again, join us next Friday at 5. We'll have another great dive into some local history for you. Every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, join us for Historians on Tap, which is a little more, I don't know what to say, loose, a little more, you know, there's drinks involved, as always. If there's a topic or a person that you want us to interview or something you want us to explore, as always, you can contact us at our website, mosbyheritagearea.org, and we will see you all soon. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Travis. Take care.
Take care, Travis.
Bye.
And I'm going to